Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am the Rabbit. Thank you so much for supporting my channel by hitting the like button and subscribing, and of course, sharing this content. Look, we have to have a conversation about Kelly Siegler. Kelly Siegler is a former Harris County State of Texas prosecutor. She has been the bureau chief of the Special Crimes Bureau, which included the Major Offenders Division, the Major Fraud Division, the Identity Theft Division, the Assets Fortitude Division, and the Consumer Fraud Division. Some of you guys could even remember Kelly Siegler on various Dateline 48-hour episodes.
Convicted of capital murder and put on death row.
I know I remember Kelly Siegler on her courtroom theater when she's prosecuting a case. Do you guys remember the Suzanne Wright case when she got on top of the mattress?
Who watched as prosecutors reenacted how they say Susan stabbed her husband Jeffrey nearly 200 times.
Now, in addition to Kelly Siegler's extensive government prosecutor background, she also is the star of two shows, Cold Justice, a 2013 series, and Prosecuting Evil. Both, I believe, are from the Oxygen Network, okay? Let's jump right into it, okay? Because there is a website, the Intercept, Cold Case Killer. Kelly Siegler is a true crime celebrity. Did she frame an innocent man for murder? It starts by parts. We have 3 parts so far. The Intercept piece is meant to expose some of the concerns with Kelly Siegler. Simply put, it's alleging that Kelly Siegler has used jailhouse informants to find convictions on cases. One specific case that it focuses on is Jeffrey Ronald Primble. Jeffrey Ronald Primble there is not a lot of information out there or media coverage about it. That's one thing that the Intercept does point out, is that this is a case that had gone highly unnoticed. I was able to find one news clip about
Aside the Goins reference, Schaefer's citing a Harris County former prosecutor who hasn't worked for the office since 2008. Kelly Siegler is her name, and for years she was considered a star prosecutor within the office. She's now the host of her own true crime television show chronicling cold cases, but with her success came criticism, also court rulings of prosecutorial misconduct, the most recent outlined in this federal court ruling, which came down Wednesday. The ruling, all 88 pages from United States District Judge Keith Ellison, temporarily sets aside the capital murder conviction of Ronald Primble, who's on death row, convicted of murder in 2002, giving the state of Texas 180 days to retry Primble or release him. Channel 2 legal analyst Brian Weiss on the why, what Siegler is accused of doing to net a conviction.
Essentially recruited a gang of jailhouse informants at the federal penitentiary in Beaumont to solicit a confession from a defendant in a cold case capital murder.
The judge also found true that Siegler didn't reveal her involvement with said informants and suppressed key testimony in the case. Critics call that a slap in the face of justice and argue it represents merely the tip of the iceberg as far as prosecutorial misconduct is concerned within the Harris County DA's office. That's where this letter comes in, addressed yesterday to current DA Kim Ogg, penned by longtime defense attorney Randy Schaefer.
I think it's a political ploy.
Schaefer is referring to Ogg's announcement yesterday that she's recommending 91 narcotics cases tied to former HPD officer Gerald Goins be thrown out due to a perceived lack of trust in sworn testimony that led to arrest warrants.
So my letter was not so much about Kelly Siegler as it was about the process. Why is the DA's office investing manpower investigating police officers, but not their own cases? Because that's where they ought to be focused.
Rogue prosecutor Schaefer's point, thus the need for review within, he argues.
But that's really what needs to be done, because this is a corrupt criminal justice system that we have not just in Harris County, but in the state.
Which is why Schaefer feels Goins is merely a ploy in a political play. Brian Weiss.
This is a situation where the current DA might well suggest that none of this happened on her watch, and that there's little, if anything, that she can do to re-examine these cases the way that she's re-examining Gerald Goins' alleged misconduct.
And we are hearing from the Harris County District Attorney's Office tonight, sent a statement to us which reads in part, quote, "We are reviewing Judge Ellison's decision and will balance the horrific facts of Pribble's case with our ethical obligation to seek justice. Like Pribble, all persons convicted of a crime have a constitutional right to file a writ of habeas corpus if they believe they have been denied due process." The statement there shying away from some of the points raised in the letter, inferring at least that there is a process, and that process, based on what they say the DA's office, is working. We're live downtown tonight. I'm Brandon Walker, KPRC Channel 2 News.
But essentially, what the Intercept is saying is that Kelly Siegler recruited jailhouse informants in an elaborate scheme to ensure that this man would be found not only guilty, but also sentenced to death. When I read this, I said that it's not possible, right? When Kelly Siegler left the Harris County District Attorney's Office, a lot of things were starting to avail. At that time, starting up her show, Cold Justice, that fans were drawn to Siegler and her co-host, Yolanda McClary, for their gumption, expertise, and empathy towards victims and families. Critics like the series focus on a small town rather than big cities. Siegler and McClary are attractive and photogenic, yet never hammed it up on camera or glamorized their jobs. The show was actually Siegler's idea. In her years as a Harris County prosecutor, she had served on the committee that reviewed cold cases across the state. She says, "I realize that a lot of these agencies have cases that are really close to being solved." She told the Texas Monthly. "That's where the idea started. After I left the DA's office, I tried to sell it to a couple of people out in the LA world. And one day I got hooked with Dick Wolf. He immediately loved the idea." One of the things that Kelly Siegler pushed the lesson she wanted audience to take from her work, if Cold Justice had a mantra, she said it was, "There is nothing wrong with circumstantial evidence cases." Oh my God, people, would you quit thinking that? By the time Cold Justice finished its third season, however, Siegler and the network were facing the first of several defamation lawsuits. A man Siegler accused of murdering his wife, who was later acquitted, alleged that the show used coercive tactics by telling the local DA office that the episode would not be televised if the DA declined to seek an indictment. The producers denied the allegations, and the lawsuit was eventually dismissed. To date, the other defamation suits have also been unsuccessful. In another episode, a Georgia prosecutor decided to move forward with the case that Siegler assembled, only for a judge to issue a scathing ruling years later, dropping all charges against the defendant and barring the state from pursuing them in the future. It is doubtful defendants would have ever been charged based on the record of this case in the absence of interest from a California entertainment studio 10 years after the crime was committed, the judge wrote. The studio profited from the scandalous allegations but had no burden of proof in the court of law. He continued, "This order is the outcome that results naturally when forensic inquiry and the pursuit of truth are confused with entertainment." Cold Justice was eventually canceled by TNT after the third season. After a brief hiatus, the show found a new home on Oxygen as part of the network's pivot to true crime programming. While all of this was going on, the Intercept says that Siegler's Texas record was under scrutiny for the first time. In July of 2015, a district court overturned the conviction of David Temple. David Temple was the high school football coach Siegler had put on trial for the killing of his pregnant wife. I remember this case very specifically and following it back then. The judge
the
found
second trial of David Temple. He's the former Alief Hastings high school football coach who's accused of murdering his pregnant wife 20 years ago. Temple was convicted and spent 10 years in prison before that conviction was overturned because of prosecutorial misconduct.
The judge found that Siegler had withheld evidence dozens of times in violation of Brady versus Maryland, requiring prosecutors to overturn exculpatory evidence to the defense. Siegler's justification for her conduct was almost as stunning as the violations themselves. Of enormous significance, the judge wrote, was her testimony insisting that she was only obligated to turn over exculpatory evidence that she believed to be true. The judge says if Kelly's bizarre interpretation were ever to be the law, then all a prosecutor would ever have to do to keep any witness statements away from the defense is say, "Well, I didn't believe it." Paul Looney, an attorney who wrote on the Temple case, told the Houston Press, "If Kelly Siegler's a lawyer in 5 years, I'll be shocked."
Now I had to stop for a minute and do a little edit to also include that David Temple was eventually sentenced to life for the murder of his wife and unborn child. Okay? That being said, though, I mean, then the question becomes, well, was Kelly Siegler wrong with the way in which she sought out her conviction, because it led to prosecutorial misconduct on her behalf? But I wanted to point that out, that David Temple was essentially sentenced to life and found guilty for the murder of his wife and unborn child.
So while Kelly Siegler was on the road promoting her shows, becoming a star, things were brewing in the back scenes. David Temple had been, had his conviction overturned. The Intercept is saying that you have this man that Kelly Siegler has set up sitting on death row. Essentially, that is what the allegation is that Kelly Siegler recruited jailhouse informants to have this man sit on death row, to have this man be convicted and put to death.
Here's a disposition with a former jailhouse informant on the Trimble case. Listen to what he has to say.
Foreman was her original informant in this case, right?
I don't know what the relationship. I thought he was doing something else for her.
So you and Foreman never discussed Pribble's case together?
Well, we talked to Pribble together. I mean, this was like a group of guys from Houston, which after this whole thing got set in motion, it kind of became evident to me that this whole group of like freaking 10 guys were trying to get information, and somehow I ended up with the information.
So this wasn't a situation of him confessing to the group and everyone then wanting a piece of the action.
No.
They were actually trying to elicit details from him so they could be part of the action.
The details Jeff Pribble gave me, he gave completely and explicitly to me and Nathan Foreman one night. He just rolled it out.
So there was no natural confession. They were eliciting, and they were trying to get information from Trimble.
Did you ever ask her for any sort of assurance before you went up and testified and put yourself at risk that it would be worthwhile?
I'm sure I probably did. But I don't remember how that conversation would have ended, because I never got anything.
Well, you got a year off?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
But you thought you would be walking out the door after?
For a house full of bodies? Yeah. Children? Sure.
Now listen to what Kelly Siegler has to say.
So it looks like you had several inmates at FCI Beaumont auditioning for this role of informant against Mr. Pribble, right?
Federal inmates audition for any role they have on any case they can think of with any information they might hear to try and get a time cut. That's what federal inmates do all day long, 24 hours a day, every day of the year.
Yeah, so you knew that they were doing this before Mr. Pribble's trial, right?
I'm not stupid.
Okay.
You disagree with the credibility of that evidence, don't you?
No, I disagree with your making a false impression to a federal judge in a case this important and making up lies and saying that I orchestrated a ring of informants in a federal prison system and that I told them what to say and caused them to lie, and not just one or two or three but 4 different cases. That is a lie.
No, there was the claim was that you were aware of a ring of informants.
I told him what to say.
Correct,
and I told him to
that
lie.
you were aware of a ring of informants.
And I fed him information.
Wasn't that the petition?
It was a whole lot more than that. And you know
And that some of the key facts were learned from you according to our witnesses and our affidavits and our tape statements.
Your witnesses' affidavits were lies.
Okay, you can take that position. And it contradicts in both cases, it contradicts precisely what you claim the real truth is, and what the state has argued. Isn't that correct?
You have not one shred or iota or piece of credible evidence from a credible witness that supports any of these allegations.
And these are the type of witnesses that you use to put people on death row.
I'm calling you a liar, sir.
and I'm calling you one.
But why? I mean, do prosecutors get a gold star in their performance reviews for putting people to death? Is that how it works? If that is the case, and just like in the David Temple case where she felt like she didn't have to, release information because it wasn't true, she didn't believe it was true, that's pretty scary.
There is one case that really stood out to me that Kelly Siegler was involved, where she called out prosecutorial misconduct, was the Anthony Graves case. Watch this.
But Kelly Siegler is not nearly as forgiving. At a news conference, she lashed out at Charles Sebesta, who was once a fellow prosecutor.
I think ultimately it's the prosecutor's responsibility. Charles Sebesta handled this case in a way that would be best described as a criminal justice system's nightmare.
What are you saying about him?
I'm saying that Charles Sebesta did everything he could, manipulating witnesses, fabricating evidence, using people, misrepresenting things to the judge and to the jury to make sure Anthony Graves got convicted of capital murder and put on death row.
Graves' attorneys had filed a complaint against Sebesta, but the Texas State Bar dismissed it, and Sebesta insists he did nothing wrong, that Siegler was just afraid of losing a big case.
They didn't have an intention of trying this case. Basically, they're looking for a way out.
Sebesta says you didn't want to take the risk of losing it at trial.
Really?
That's what he said.
Well, I would say that he's going to have a hard time finding any single other person that would agree that I'm afraid to go to trial on anything.
But Siegler says there was one thing she dreaded about this case, telling the victim's family.
18 years they believed that the two men responsible for killing their family, their babies, their mom, their sister, got what they deserved.
Essentially, this prosecutor, this former prosecutor, this star former prosecutor, Kelly Siegler, who I will say I'm a little upset to hear this. She's accused of running a jailhouse snitch scheme, and it's all focused on the Primble case. The reality is that there is no direct evidence tying Primble to the murders. Instead, Intercept says that the Harris County prosecutor Kelly Siegler case was based on the thinnest of circumstantial evidence, which made the jailhouse informant's testimony indispensable, even if his credibility was questionable. He was the only witness who could have connected Primble to the case. He was the only witness who could have connected Primble to the crime. So her tactic was to promise time off, early release to these jailhouse informants. All in the scheme, all in the plot to find this man guilty and sentence him to death. If that is the case, y'all know how scary that is? I am clutching my invisible pearls. I really am. They even went as far as to making sure that these informants took pictures with the accused, okay, with those that were charged, as a way to, and they used some of these pictures in the trial to further push the narrative that they're connected somehow and we're friends, and therefore you tell your friends your secrets. The Intercept concludes their expose, their Kelly Siegler investigation, by saying truth will come out. If Siegler was paying attention to Primble's case as it made its way through the courts, there was no sign of it on her Twitter feed. As Primble's fate hung in the balance of the Supreme Court, Siegler posted a landscape photo taken from an airplane. "Hello, America. First case, season 7. We start working tomorrow," she wrote. "Wish us luck." The new season of Cold Justice is set to air next year. In the meantime, Siegler is promoting the inaugural season of Prosecuting Evil at the CrimeCon in Orlando. She was welcomed with cheers and standing ovations. When you're not
like
here,
both of them, it's because of you that we get to keep doing all this. We're excited to be here, and I hope y'all love it, and thank you all for everything you do
ovations.
for us.
When you're not here, you're so missed, said the Oxygen correspondent who introduced Siegler. When you're back here, it feels like a reunion. Siegler took the stage with the showrunner from Cold Justice and the executive producer of Prosecuting Evil. They teased the new show premiere with the clip revisiting Siegler's most notorious moments, straddling her colleague on a bloody mattress to reenact a defendant stabbing her husband to death.
Family who watched as prosecutors reenacted how they say Susan stabbed her husband Jeffrey nearly 200 times.
I can truly say that probably is what led to all of this, Siegler said of the bed stunt. It was the point where her life was as hard driving prosecutor produced the parallel life she would later inhabit, turning into a reality TV star. There were members of the legal community who thought she went too far. She told the audience, but that didn't bother her. I care more about what people like you think. To Primble supporters, Siegler continued celebrity is less disturbing than the lack of accountability she faced. Ward Larkin, the anti-death penalty activist, has made it a point to never watch Cold Justice. It's obvious she's extremely intelligent, he says, but she's a horrible person. She has no compunction about the horrors she inflicts on people. So I guess the question becomes, what do you all think? Is this just a hit piece that was done on Kelly Siegler? Is there some truth to Kelly running a prison scheme, a jailhouse informant scheme to secure her convictions? I'm going to link the Intercept's article in the description box so you guys can go read it for yourselves. This was just a little brief review of it. There are so many details there that I did not touch because of the length of it, but I definitely recommend that you guys check out the article and make up your own mind. Um, and if you continue to be a fan of Kelly Siegler, well, now if none of this sways you to think differently of Kelly Siegler, then I guess that's okay as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you guys on the next one. Rabbits out.